Great.
Now we can open it up.
Yep.
Ugh. Does anyone else have it? Oh, it's stapled at the bottom too, that's why.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, I can't. Oh, it's because it's stapled at the bottom.
So
Yeah.
I ripped it.
Which is really.
Choose 8.
Wait a second. Oh wait, so it isn't assigned like what book?
Well, there's one specific or one at the bottom. Well, there's a few. The first one is from the this Jones.
Do you want to do that one?
I could
Or we can. How about we all pick ones we like?
yeah.
How about we pick 10 that we like out of the 15 and then see where we align?
Okay.
Does that sound good?
Or can you tell any that are like specifically
let me look.
yours?
Oh, I'm kind of 5. I'll underline which ones I am.
Okay, I'll try and underline those names.
We should do 7, I feel like.
How do you mix this Italian later?
I think I can do 9.
I found 4 that are definitely mine.
I found 5 that were mine.
And I found 4.
Or 4 that were mine.
I feel like some of them are kind of like
Yeah,
maybe,
I'm 5, 6, 7, and 10.
Okay, I said 9, 10, 11, 12. 10 can be, I feel like,
Both of
both
them.
of them, yeah.
Okay, then we should do it, I feel like.
What do you feel?
I have 1, 2, 8, and 13. Like for sure.
Okay, so we're not.
So which ones, are we not going to do? We're not going to do 3.
Wait, who is 14? Who's Carter?
I'm Carter.
So what do people want to do with theirs?
I could do 1, 8, and 13. That's 3.
Let me go check.
I can do... Noelle, you said you had 10 too.
Yeah.
I think we could both do that.
Yeah, let's do. Okay, so what ones did you want to do, Michaela? Sorry.
1, 8, and 13.
1, 8, 13. Is there anything about religious?
We can do 9, 11, and 12, and we can share 10.
Yeah. Which ones did you say? 9, 11, 12? So we're at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We're at 7. Okay. And then I can do 7. Is that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8? Great.
You're doing 7 and
7, 10. And what was the other one?
Because it's just 8 of them left to do.
Oh.
So we'll
Okay.
have 1, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
Great.
Wait.
Okay. Do we all want to? Oh, that's why Laramie.
It's what?
That's why Laramie caught it. No. Sounds like a campfire.
It does. So I'm doing 1, 8, and 13. Which one did you guys do?
I'm doing 9, 11, 12.
I'm doing 7 and 10.
Okay.
But I will assist.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Prep question. Oh, it's still on.
Just press it.
Yeah,
You're still
10:44. Yeah, we still have a couple minutes if you guys want it. You guys want it? Still.
I think you can do good. Do you want
You
to go
need it?
around?
Can I have like 2
Yeah.
seconds? I was just rereading these.
Can we let her read like direct quotes?
I think so.
Okay.
Should we have our books?
Should we have our book?
I have my book.
Yeah. I think they said you can.
It's open book.
Yeah.
Would it help you guys if I had the thing?
No, if it's helpful, like if you got it without the book, then like it's not a big deal. You got it. It's a pretty mug.
It's such nice.
Natasha has the Starbucks ones.
Should we time the questions?
I can give us like time answer if you guys want. If you guys want to have your phones on.
And do you guys want to do them in order? Like, of the questions?
Yeah, whatever people want to do.
Okay.
What do you guys want to do?
Because I'm doing 1. Is anybody doing anything up until 8?
You're doing 7.
You're doing 7. Okay, so we do 1, 7, 8.
We can also see how the conversation goes.
Yeah.
And if it like leads into another question, then we might be able to skip around. But maybe we follow it for now.
Yeah. That's a good idea.
Do you have the No, never mind.
What?
Well, I'm thinking. No, it's not that helpful. Okay, let's. Oh, do we have to start now? Or can
No,
we just start?
it's
Oh, hi.
Okay.
Ready?
Yeah.
Well, what is the first question?
It's mine.
Yeah,
So you're
it's
good.
okay, girl. We will prep questions. We will help each other. We tell vignettes.
All right.
2, 1.
Okay, so the question is, how do you differentiate between religion and spirituality? And it is from the Jones reading on Psychology of Religion and Truth. So it kind of describes religion just like broadly as, I guess, more institutional and spirituality as like more individual. So like comparing and contrasting them, he says like religion is external and objective versus spirituality as internal and subjective, and like religion is old and spirituality is more like new. Religion is structure and spirituality is more functional. And then religion is fixed and frozen versus spirituality is flexible and dynamic. And then even goes as far to say religion is bad versus spirituality is good. So I guess that's the differentiation made by Pargament on the difference between religion and spirituality. And I think that it's interesting like how polarized they sound, kind of against each other. So that's how he differentiates them. And then he kind of goes on to talk about, I mean, I guess it's not, it feels like kind of, I don't know, maybe stuffy to describe religion that way. But I guess it kind of gives us a good framework for thinking of them as separate. Because I think when we think about religion, we do think of more like tradition or kind of set in stone, whereas spirituality can mean a lot of different things, and it does feel a little bit more fluid. And I guess he also says like new, fluid, personal, and adaptive. So I guess, yeah, that's kind of what he gives us. And I think that when I think of spirituality, I think of it definitely as like more of a loose thing. And whenever someone says they're spiritual, I'm like, okay, what does that really mean?
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting to differentiate. And I wonder kind of maybe the dangers of the like very different kind of definitions they can come up with, because I don't know that they necessarily have to be different. And I kind of like the way that he ties it all together and saying, focusing on Pargament's understanding of spirituality as the individual search for sacred and religion as those structures, including belief systems, traditions of practice, and human organizations that are designed to facilitate spirituality, we may not be inclined to object. So I think it's interesting to think of religion as designed to facilitate spirituality as opposed to them being in contrast with one another. Because I feel like so often it can feel that way. So I think I really appreciate that, the way that it kind of ties those together.
What was when they're comparing, contrasting, he said spirituality is loose and religion is stiff.
Frozen, I think he said.
What is?
Yeah, it's frozen, yeah.
Oh, it's frozen. Okay.
So, yeah, sorry. Yeah. Well, actually, hold on. Yeah. Religion is fixed and frozen versus spirituality is flexible and dynamic.
Okay. Thank you.
Would you agree with that?
I think that I would agree, like, kind of, which part of it? Like, the last part, or, like...
The frozen, and then spirituality being stagnant. Or fluid.
I feel like maybe that has grown for me in time. Like, I think that there was, like, that really big, like, polarization of, like, oh, religion's terrible. It's, like, all about, like, law and structure, and just, I think even coming to Wheaton and learning more about, like, liturgical services, that felt very stuffy for me, and I was like, oh, this is just, like, very, like, legalistic and very, like, but I think I found a lot of beauty in, like, just structure of the church and the tradition, and really respected the need for tradition and the history behind tradition, and, like, you know, it's history for a reason and it's tradition for a reason. So I think while spirituality sounds really great for personal faith, I think that kind of moving on to shared faith definitely requires some level of even, I guess, respect and appreciation and understanding of religion. Otherwise, it's kind of not really rooted in the foundation, in my opinion.
It's like all focused on the self.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. I remember, I think it was the first week of class, like in the reading, they were talking about like the root word of like religion and how it's from like ligaro or something like that, like meaning ligament, and how it's important to recognize that religion is like, or like a ligament like binds to something else like in the body, and so you have to ask the question, what is religion binding to? And I like appreciated the way that you like phrased it, because religion does facilitate spirituality, and it's not just like it has to be this way or it has to be the other way, like you have to be religious or you have to be spiritual, but the fact that they do come together and they do go hand in hand, as a Christian, I think is important to recognize, rather than just assuming they're on both sides. So I didn't think of it that way, the way that you said it, so I appreciated that.
Lucian wrote about the Ligaire, and he talked about how it's like to connect to. And so Lucian writes, and he's like, that implies that humans have been disconnected from something. And he says, like, it's unknown if it's, like, disconnected from each other, disconnected from God, disconnected from the church. But religion helps connect that.
Right.
And I think I've definitely seen that in my own life of religion facilitating the spaces. And I think we see that in the church of just liturgy or sacredness, and helps us understand those sacred moments, how we can connect to God. How would you say that I would say that religion has changed, though. Like, if you look at denominations and
absolutely.
church schisms and everything, like, I would say that religion itself is so different. Or even the rituals of each church, you know, like how they pray, who's the pastor, all those things. So I would disagree with Jones that it is frozen. Say that
That's very fair.
There's a lot more movement than we think.
I think there's also a huge disconnect between like religion and spirituality, is because, like, as you're saying, like, spirituality is more like internal, like self-focused, and religion is more like community and like church-oriented and tradition. And I think a lot of people have been hurt by that tradition or by that church. So it's like, okay, I don't want to do away with like all of my faith, so I'm going to keep the personal aspects of it, but then like do away with tradition. And so I feel like that's where a lot of that disconnect comes into play. Not saying that it's good, but I think that could be also another perspective as to why there's such a huge divide in those.
How?
Oh,
yeah,
so it doesn't.
Go on.
I'll be doing this throughout.
Nice view of my face.
How would you, like, I would say everyone's been hurt by the church in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So how would you tell someone to reconcile their spirituality with religion if they have been hurt by the church? It's a super broad question.
Yeah.
So
that's good.
both of you guys can answer too.
I feel like I can't answer that without going down a million rabbit trails.
Yeah.
Like,
because even as women, I'm sure we've all been hurt in the church.
well, I feel like we operate in imperfect communities, and whether that's in the church or outside of the church, we're going to be hurt. So I feel like I've heard that as an excuse, and I feel like it's a very valid excuse in lots of instances. But like understanding the framework of Christianity and how like God desires for like good relationships, and He never like intended for relationships to be broken. I feel like we should be striving towards that perfect picture of like living in community and living as the body of Christ. And like we know that nothing is going to be perfect on this earth, especially not our relationships. So like that doesn't mean that we stop pursuing them and pursuing righteousness and pursuing like that perfect picture of like what the Lord says will happen. Like in Revelation 7, we're all together, different people from different tribes, tongues, and nations, like worshiping before the Father. So I think if like we all have that as our end goal, like yes, there will be hurts along the way, but like we're all on the same like journey.
Seems like if we were more willing to strive for relationships, we wouldn't have so many divisions in the church. Because there's so many denominations and there's so many just like little nuances that people are like, well, I'm not Lutheran because they believe this stuff, so I'm going to break away and call myself ... And so like I definitely agree. I feel like if we consistently strive to better our relationships and be honest with each other rather than just like breaking away and being like we're going to create our own church.
Right.
But I think a lot of it breaks down to people misinterpreting scripture and assuming that they have the right way. And so I think sometimes we need to come in with a humble mindset and attitude in regards to like how should we live like within the body of Christ. But no, that's a hard question to like talk to someone who has been like hurt to like bring them back, because I feel like a lot of times I like err more on the side of saying what does the church need to do differently, what do they need to change, rather than like, okay, how do you tell someone who's been like deeply hurt like the power of forgiveness and the power of reconciliation. Because like that's not an easy thing to do, and it's not the natural thing to do.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah, it's like countercultural. It's uncomfortable, truly.
Right.
I feel like that's what makes it so powerful, though, because like, you know, those stories that do end in forgiveness and reconciliation, like those relationships are often very like much stronger because of what they've gone through. At least in my like very limited experience, which is sad. Like it's limited, but I feel like if we practice that, like truly practice it. It's my sister. Oh. I think it's still recording. Yeah.
That's funny.
Hold on, no! She's gonna keep doing it. I know. She's gonna like.
Okay. Are we still rolling?
Yeah, it's still there.
Yeah, we're still going strong.
On that lovely note,
We're at Liberty.
I remember one story that my dad told me about one of his friends. I'm going to try not to butcher the story, but it was him and his sister, and I think it was just him and his sister in the house, and then somebody broke into the house and like raped the sister and killed her, and like took away all their money or whatever. Eventually they like caught the guy and he like went to prison. There's two of them. One got the death penalty and one got like life in prison. And it's just so like fascinating hearing his story of just like how he went from like hating the person so much to like getting to the point where he forgave the person and became friends with them like while they were in prison. And like in our society that makes like no sense. It's like you have a right to hate them. You have a right to like they took away your sister, like your family, like that causes a lot of hurt that like you should be angry about. But just to show the power of forgiveness that he had and how changed the man was, not the man in prison, but him himself, like how much that bettered himself. Was just like really powerful to show that, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is a lot of power in forgiveness. So I think trying to show that to like your question, to the person who has been hurt is it's difficult, but it's a necessity, I think.
That's great. How would you guys say, for you guys in college, I feel like we've all probably taken different exploratory steps in what religion and our own spirituality looks like since we've left home and family and our home church. How would you guys say going out of Wheaton you want religion to affect your spirituality? If you view them as different.
Yeah. I feel like understanding the need for like social support and just a community of believers has been really important for me to realize in college, and not just like, oh, like I see these people every week, but like really knowing the people that you go to church with and like just doing life with people and how essential that is to like keeping your faith has been really impactful for me, and I think that's something that like I will carry with me throughout like out of college and into my adult life, just knowing, okay, I need to be involved in a church and like not just involved, but like to really like know people and like seek people out and pursue other people the way that Christ has pursued me, because like it's just so valuable to have those kinds of relationships, and I don't know that like a lot of faith formation can happen without those. And I want to keep growing. I don't want to just like stop growing after college. So pursuing even like people that are younger than me, saying like, hi, can I like be your mentor? So just understanding like that kind of need to like be a part of a close knit kind of fabric of a community. So that's been really valuable for me.
Yeah, I think I would echo off of that. Like, the more I'm seeing like religion being more community focused rather than just your personal self, I'm realizing how important that is. And so I think investing in those communities is so important. Not only like now, but like post-graduation as well. I do think like you can grow a lot in your faith, like having your Devo time and like praying, like that is super important, but like I don't think you can make the same strides if you're not in a group that's like holding you accountable and like challenging you and like pushing you in your faith. And I think a lot of times in a lot of like religious circles, in a negative light, we're told like not to question things. I guess this is kind of taking a different direction, but I think it's important to have a body of believers where you guys are questioning things so that you can seek truth and what the Lord has to say about it. Because I think for many people, they have doubts and they have questions, but they just kind of keep it to themselves, or they try to figure it out themselves. And I think there's a danger to that, because sometimes you can just talk yourself out of like your faith if you don't have a strong foundation. And so that's why I agree, like having a strong like social support system among like a body of believers and like people who are stronger in your faith, but then also people that are not as far along as your faith as well, so that you guys are all learning from each other. What do you think, Noelle?
Awesome. Yeah, I agree a lot with like the people on both ends of the mentors and then mentees, like the flow of mentorship, which we learned in discipleship ministries. But
Are we doing on time?
good, we're at 16:30.
Great.
It's 15 minutes per question.
I think it's okay if we go.
What?
over.
8 minutes per question. Is it?
I know we have 8 questions.
8 questions, 15 minutes each. I'm like 90% sure.
And I think we'll be okay if we're over on some questions and under on others.
Oh, yeah.
Ideally, the group discussion
Okay.
will last
Will last
two
Up to 2
Okay.
hours, so we can do under each.
Yeah.
So let's aim for like 10 to 15 for each.
That sounds good to me.
Approximately. Okay, great. So I can give us like a... How about I tell us when we're at 10 for each question? Does
That
work?
works. That's
Okay.
good. Okay, yeah.
Great. Good. Okay, we're doing... Also, I realized we should say what questions we're doing.
Oh, yeah.
So that was
I
question
said
one.
one.
Oh, hi.
That's how I started it.
Good.
So just, yeah,
Good
whenever
job.
we start it, we'll start it with the question. And like what reading is this? Great.
7. We're doing 7 now.
Can I read the question?
I can read it, yeah. How do you make sense of doubting in light of what is known about the process of religious development? Pelagian talks a ton about the process of religious development, but he talks about it like, there's a lot of different ways he talks about it, as in stages, like Piaget's and Fowler's stages, and then he also talks about it in age groups. That's what I'm going to focus on for this, probably. So he talks a lot about when you're a child, you learn religion. You know, you like intake it because of attachment theory. You build relationships with people, and that's what brings you to church, keeps you with church, and then modeling. So it's basically like your parents teach you everything. So when you're a kid, you learn, like, if you go to mass, you learn the prayers. If you go to church, like, you learn when to stand up, sit down, you know, like for your different religion, you learn all those cues, those rituals, and all those things. And then going into teenhood, that's when doubting happens. And this is where it gets really interesting, I think, because Pelagian said that teens both grow in their faith, but then they also grow in their doubt. So it's kind of like they grow simultaneously. Because your faith grows, because you're finally making it your own. And, you know, questioning and saying, like, do I really believe this? Why am I doing these rituals? So it's not just stand up, sit down. It's why am I standing up? Why am I sitting down? Why do I trust what this pastor's saying? It's like all these learning things. But then you grow in your doubt because you grow in your questioning. And I really liked a quote that he said was, he has, like, teens have a lower tendency to believe, but to wonder about. So, like, the phrase, like, wonder about, like, why do I do this? So it's not like a set, like, I do this because I believe in it, but kind of just like, oh, what do I really think about this? Which I really liked. Like, I feel like teens are very fluid, which I thought was cool. And then when we move into, like, young adolescence and then young adulthood, like, things become a lot more foundational, so you can build, you can grow, and if you stay with the faith, it can continue growing. And then when people become older, so when you're young, you have a futuristic lens of what happens, and so you are like, what do I want my faith to look like in the future, which I feel like we can get as seniors, like, what is this going to look like for the rest of my life? Do I want to keep this for the rest of my life? And then even, like, parenting, like Dr. Butman talks a lot about his kids and his grandkids, like, how do you pass it on to generations, and why should you pass it on? But then when you're older, you look backwards more, which I thought was really interesting. Like, you reflect on your past. So religion grows and takes different forms as you age and as you question, I would say. So the level of doubt I thought was just really interesting. So the book said something along the lines of, like, when you're born, you use religion to help you create a worldview. So it helps you answer all the heavy questions like existentialism and things like that. So it can either, I feel like religion can either push you to answer those questions, or those answers can push you away from the faith, or those questions can push you away from the faith. And so for my experience, like, I was super involved in church because of what I got from it, which we'll talk about later with the intrinsic and extrinsic faith, but that helped me stay in the religion. But doubt, like, the process of religious development is, like, you have to question those things in order to have stronger faith. So I would say doubt is super necessary in religious development because it makes you question why you believe what you believe, so that you can integrate the faith into your daily life. Yeah, that's my rant. I think doubting's really important for religious development. And necessary. I don't know, do you guys agree with that?
Oh, yeah. I think everybody has doubts, but not everyone's willing to admit that they have doubts.
Yeah.
And so once you're willing to say, like, I do question this, I do question that, then you can get further to seeking the truth.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like the Lord says, like, when you seek me, you will find me. When you seek me with all your heart.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I think it's important to have questions and like have doubts about things that like you just did automatically when you were younger, but now you're asking like, why is this happening? Like, how is this happening? And like in neuroscience, like part is coming out of me, but like when you talk about like teens like starting to doubt, like they're like in that stage where they're like prefrontal cortex and their brain is like starting to develop a little bit more, and it's like still not fully developed, but that whole process of like, you know, asking questions, like reasoning, like problem solving, like this really starts to develop. So it makes sense why they would like start to doubt certain things that they would just do automatically before, because like mommy and daddy said so. You know? Yeah. And then there's another connection that I when you were talking that I thought of. I think we talked a little bit about this in class, but I feel like for a lot of people, so I'm trying to formulate my thoughts, but people make the connection of like God being like our heavenly Father, who's like our protector, our provider, like the one who's there for us, who will never leave us. Like that's how people like try to draw that conclusion, but I think a lot of times people have even more doubts if they grew up in an environment where their earthly father was not those things, and instead of creating like a safe place, it created a harmful situation. So like later on in life, if someone was to tell them like, hey, your dad, or like God is like your father, it's like, well, my father was terrible, so like why would I want to do that? And I guess I never really thought about that, especially with some of my friends growing up who like struggled in their faith. And I didn't realize how much my dad had an impact on me positively towards seeing Christ as like, or seeing God as someone who will support me, someone who will be there for me and love me unconditionally, because that's what my dad on earth showed. But for many people who didn't have that, it's just a little bit harder to draw that connection. Does that make sense? So I guess like my question would be like, how do you talk with someone who has doubts from that point of view? You know what I mean? I'm like asking because I like don't know the answer to that.
Something that's actually in the Jones reading talks about divine attachment, which is like basically talking kind of about the attachment theory. And it says, a wide array of research has demonstrated striking similarities between one's perception of one's relationships to one's parents, and one's perceived relationship to God or divine figure. So, yeah, it's like it says that religion provides surrogate attachment figures, most notably gods, that may be used to regulate the stress and gain a sense of false security. Yeah. So young children with healthy attachment use the parent as a safe haven in times of stress or threat. But in contrast, ambivalent or insecure attachment disrupts the child's sense of safety and complicates development. So, yeah.
And not to say that, like, every child who has, like, not a great father, like, some people will run towards God because, like, I do crave that, I do desire that. But
I'm sure it's so hard to, like, work within that framework because, like, they just don't have it.
Exactly.
I feel like it'd be very hard to, like, truly, like, lean into that in a way that, that, like, is, I don't know, there's just, like, something to be said about, like, having experienced secure attachment, and I don't know that, like, you can manufacture that. But, I mean, of course, I don't want to, like, downplay the power of God to, like, be a secure attachment figure for people, so I don't think that, like, I would say it's, like, a qualification for having, or to be attached to God securely. I think that God can work really incredible things in people's lives, and that is a really important question.
I think it's interesting because because of our limitedness, we can only compare God to, like, things on this earth. Unless He's revealed Himself to us, you know, which He does through Scripture, through nature, through spiritual experiences. But it's like all we can compare Him to is like fathers or moms, or what does this look like? And or even in friendships, like, oh, you show me Christ-like love.
Yeah.
But really, like, what that person can show you can't even compare to what Christ can show us, yet, like, that's the only thing we can grasp, almost, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, I was talking to someone the other day, and I'm like, honestly, like, I can't understand the vastness of God's love right now. Yeah.
A drop in the ocean.
We can move to the next question. I've got 27 minutes.
Is it 8?
Yeah. Do we want to do it, or do you want to hop to?
I feel like they all kind of connect.
Yeah, that's true.
So, let's see. 8. I got a quote that pretty much answers this for us. So 8 is, what predicts long-term faithfulness according to Garber? So, one of the kind of important distinctions he makes, he gives like a 3-part kind of framework for how he thinks of people that like have kept the faith kind of throughout their whole lives. So he says that they are people who have formed a worldview that can account for truth amidst the challenge of relativism in a culture increasingly marked by secularization and pluralization. And then there are people who found a mentor whose life pictured the possibility of living with and in that worldview, and they forged friendships with folk whose common life offered a context for those convictions to be embodied. Yeah, so I think the biggest takeaway is, like, obviously, like, being able to form a worldview that accounts for truth in the midst of, like, a really crazy world that is kind of vying for your attention, and also kind of the thought of how impactful, like we were talking about, social support in like a community is on someone. And it reminds me of like the discussion of the White Rose in here that talks about the brother and sister in Germany who basically, like, after kind of going through that critical period of like finding truth in the midst of a country that told them the complete opposite of what they had found to be true in God, after like seeking out mentors and people of the faith that they could look up to, and then like banding together with others who felt the same passion and were kind of on the same life trajectory, they could do nothing but respond, even if that meant their lives. And I think that like strikes me. That,
what
like,
do you mean by respond? Sorry, can
like,
you refresh?
like, so like knowledge. So that like term that all epistemologies have ethical implications. So like understanding something, like if you really understand like the love of God or like what Christ did for us on the cross, like I feel like it requires a response from us. We can't just like know it and then be like, oh, okay, that's great.
Like action.
Right,
Gotcha.
like it's a call to action. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So yeah, like a lived theology instead of just like knowing about God or knowing all of the like historical things of the church, like actually like living in that. And yeah, I think that that's something that has really struck me about Garber and the way that he writes. Like it's very much, all right, so like you know all this stuff, you have this education, like now what are you going to do with it? And like what do those people that like have lived faithful lives look like? And what challenges have they faced? Like what are those like components that like comprise them being faithful? So yeah, like reflecting back on the 3 things that I described, I think that for me, the mentor and the community have been like the biggest things that I've seen, like at least in my time at Wheaton, that have been like very impactful in kind of me seeing myself more on the road to long-term faithfulness. What do you guys feel like? Like, are there any other 3 that stick out to you?
Yeah, I think that's what we talked about earlier. I think the social support is really big for me. I don't know, like I don't know. I feel like I wouldn't be a Christian in many realms if I hadn't have had people like keep me accountable to going to church and breaking in.
Yeah.
Long-term faithfulness is something I think a lot about, though, because it's so like scary. Like I feel like it's easy to be, for me, it's easy to be a Christian at Wheaton.
Right.
Not necessarily living out my faith in the, like, the reaction, like
right.
you said.
Right.
But, like, I would still, like, say, like, I'm living a Christian life in a lot of realms, even when my faith isn't super strong and active. Whereas in a secular world, I'm curious what my faith will be like leaving Wheaton, of, like, will it be stronger, will it be weakened by this? Yeah. So I think a lot about the long term goal.
Yeah. I don't know, I honestly feel like people who have, like faithfulness, like, long term, are people who doubt, like, all along the way. Because, like, even in, like, my personal life, like, my faith was strengthened, like, when I doubted, but then I did something about it. Like, I sought after something to figure out what is the truth, how do I fit into this? And so, I don't know, I think it's super important to have those circles. Like, it all connects. It's really funny, but, like, it's important, yes, to doubt, but then to have people to hold you accountable and to help push you along in your faith and be like, you know what, I don't really get that either. Let's see if we can try to wrestle through this question together and, like, maybe talk to this person about it. Like, that doesn't happen when you're just in your room by yourself reading your Bible. You know, even if you have all the theology and background, like, in the world, like, it's important to have that, like, social support, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like that's been really impactful for me this year, being in Christian thought and hearing about all of these different just things that people have wrestled through throughout the ages. Just like the different divisions and things that, like, we have a lot of questions about, but don't really seem to have super clear answers. And just to, like, even hear my professor, like, give very, like, thorough, like, descriptions of the issues, but then, like, us kind of asking her, like, all right, like what does that mean? And, like, what's the answer? And she's like, well, I don't really know. So I think that there's something, like, almost encouraging in hearing someone that is so clearly dedicated to Jesus. Like, this is kind of, like, going on that, like, having, like, exemplars or just people that have obviously lived out a faith for far longer than I've even been alive. And seeing them have the same doubts and questions and be like, yeah, like, we're wrestling through this together, and maybe there's not an answer or a clear answer, but that doesn't mean that we should give it up. So I think that's been really encouraging to me.
Do you guys think that for some people, if they think there's not a definite, like, finite answer, then they won't even, like, pursue, like, going after it? Because I think there's a lot of power and truth to struggling through it and trying to work through it. But I know in some people's minds, like, if there's not going to be an answer at the end of this or something that, like, I can say in my framework, this is the answer, like, is it even worth it? I don't know, what do you guys think?
I think that's something I've thought a lot about, because there are so many existential questions that we have that we'll only know when we get to heaven and can sit with God.
Right.
Say,
Break this down.
But then that doesn't mean we sit still, you know? Like, we still have to be... Oh, okay. Something I've thought a lot about recently is, like, how, like, the life of a Christian, like, I feel like there's so much tension between be still and know that he is God, but then wrestling, like Jacob did. Like, you're constantly, like, God, like, I'm questioning this, and I'm fighting through this, and this is a temptation I'm dealing with, and I'm trying to grow in this area, but I feel like you're not helping me to, like, be still and know that he is God. And so I feel like this year, especially, I've had just, like, a lot of tension between that, of, like, questioning so much, but then have to, like, go to bed at the end of the day and say, like, God, you are still God, and I'm just a human, like, give me contentment. Even that word always gets me. Contentment, even when I am, like, so confused in what your will is.
That kind of reminds me of the process of lamenting. Like, I think, and this is something I've just recently in the past couple of years learning about, because we never talked about lamenting in, like, my church, like, at school. Like, I there's a whole book on it, and I didn't really look into it. But I think the whole thing is kind of, like, to what you were saying, Noelle, is crying out to God in your confusion and your frustration, not understanding why something happened or why something didn't happen. And then at the end of it being like, but I still trust you, and I still think you're sovereign, and I still know that you are there. I think there's a lot of power to it. It's not saying that you're naive or you're just sugarcoating it, saying like, oh well, whatever. Like, you're still wrestling with it, you're still struggling with it, but still recognizing that we are still finite beings at the end of the day. But we serve a God who is not.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I feel like that's really fair, and I feel like there's a comfort in eternity, kind of like within the wrestling. I feel like, kind of like you said, like a structure, like the Psalms of, or even Lamentations, just like laying this all out before God and saying, this is confusing, or I'm like questioning this, and like, where are you?
Right.
But then like coming back at the end and saying, but I know you're God, and I know like, you're eternal.
Yeah. And like, even like going off of that, sorry, we probably have to wrap up. But I know like for me personally, there are questions that like there are answers to it that you can figure out that may not seem what's the word, like clear or like blatant in the here and the now. I guess like personally, like making a long story short, like I really struggled with my faith sophomore year of college because I saw like so much injustice and so much just like discrimination going around, and I wasn't upset about that, but I was upset with how the church was responding. And so a lot of times the responses I would hear is like, well, like God will deal with that like when Jesus returns, or like ultimate justice will turn later, and that's not our issues that we deal with in the church. It's personal, like salvation. That's the important thing. And so I was like, okay, I'm struggling with these things. I'm dealing with all this discrimination. Other people that look like me are dealing with this discrimination, like, and the church isn't responding or responding in a way that makes me feel loved, which is what we always talk about. So I was like, I don't understand this like disconnect, and so that was something I wrestled with God on a lot. I was like, I don't understand, like, if you're supposed to be God, I'm supposed to serve, but like obviously I'm missing something. Like, am I not a part of this equation? Like, so for me, like my dad would always teach me and my sisters, like, don't just believe like what you believe because mom and dad told you to, or because your Sunday school told you to, or because your church or whatever told you. Like, figure out for yourself, like seek it out for yourself. And so I always like believed that before. I was like, yeah, I believe, like I'm good. But like sophomore year was definitely a turning point where I was like, I really need to figure this out, because I was at a point where I was like, if at the end of the day the conclusion is Christians aren't supposed to care about these kind of things, then like I don't think Christianity is for me. This doesn't make sense to me. Like I don't, like, God, like this doesn't make sense. I don't feel loved. I don't feel cared for. I don't feel supported. I feel like and this was just me being personal, like with God, like I felt like He did not care about people that looked like me. So I was like, how does this come into play? So having those doubts like forced me to seek out people and seek truth, and what does that look like. And basically, like, long story short, like the Lord just like showed up in magnificent ways, like with the classes I took in New Testament, and like looking at the Bible in a whole new way, like seeing that like our God is a God of justice, not just for eternal salvation, but also in the here and the now, and we are called to respond to things like you were saying before. Anyways, I don't want to get fully into it, but like just to kind of like conclude like what you were saying before, like it is important to doubt and seek out, and sometimes there are answers that we're not going to fully know, and we have to say that He is sovereign, but I do think there are also questions that like if we seek out, the Lord will show up in ways that we're not expecting, that will strengthen our faith. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Made a lot of sense. I'm a little confused because it says each question should be approximately 15 minutes, but then you may take up to 2 hours to answer the questions.
That is too much.
So what does that mean if it's supposed to be approximately 15 minutes, but then we're not supposed to go
For
over
some
2
reason, I felt
hours?
like it was, he said in class it's like 10 minutes, or like 8 to 10 minutes per question or something like that.
He said someone talks for 8 to 10 minutes, I think.
I'm thinking maybe the 15 minutes is like the max.
Okay, so let's aim for 10 to 15.
So maybe like let's cut it off at that point. Yeah.
Okay, we've done
Should we
4.
take a break? I think we did 3.
Oh, we did 3 and 40. Yeah. Yes.
What are we at time-wise?
We're at 40.
Okay.
Let me see how long this video is. Yeah, it's like almost an hour, so we'll stop it here and restart.